Have you ever
Oh
met a
dear.
child so
I
spoiled
am
that even
so
her own
terribly
father
sorry
couldn't
about
control
that.
her? In this
Are you
story,
quite all
a
right?
little girl born into luxury believes that rudeness means power until one quiet waitress teaches her a lesson that no amount of money could buy. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can melt even the coldest hearts. Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me, from which country and at what time are you watching this story? The bell over Willow's diner gave a tired jingle as the morning crowd drifted in from the mist. Coffee cups clinked. Old men in plaid jackets argued over baseball, and the smell of bacon lingered like a friendly memory. At a corner booth, Evelyn Hart moved between tables with the steady rhythm of someone who'd learned to make grace out of exhaustion. 23, sharp-eyed but soft-spoken, she carried a pot of coffee like it was part of her own heartbeat. Outside, autumn leaves chased one another along the wet asphalt of Merrimont Avenue. The town of Asheville stirred awake slowly, its mountains wrapped in low fog, church bells muffled somewhere beyond the ridge. Evelyn liked these mornings the way people said good morning with the kind of hope that belonged to small towns. What she didn't like were the bills waiting on her nightstand, or the student loans that shadowed every refill she poured. Still, she smiled, because smiling cost nothing. Near the window, a man in a dark suit sat opposite a girl of about 10. He looked like the kind of customer who didn't belong here. Silver cufflinks, perfect tie, eyes that had forgotten what rest looked like. The child, by contrast, vibrated with restless energy, tapping her spoon against the glass of water until the table trembled. The father leaned forward, whispering something that sounded like a plea. The girl crossed her arms. Evelyn approached with her notepad. "Good morning, folks," she said gently. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" The man's voice was low, careful. "Just coffee. Black." The girl stared at the menu like it had personally offended her. "This seat is wet," she declared, loud enough for half the diner to hear. Her father sighed. "Sophie, please. It is wet. And that light," she pointed upward, "is humming. It's giving me a headache." Evelyn glanced at the booth, then at the light. "Fluorescence can be tricky," she said softly, "but the seat's dry as the Blue Ridge air. Would you like to switch anyway?" "No," the girl said, suspicious. "I want the water from the penthouse, not this tap stuff. Are you trying to poison me?" The diner hushed. A couple of regulars turned their heads. Evelyn kept her smile steady. "This is Asheville's best," she said. "Filtered twice, same water the mayor drinks." Something in her calm tone disarmed the moment. Even the father looked up, faint surprise flickering across his face. "My name's Evelyn," she continued, setting the glass down again. "I'll take good care of you. How about I bring a fresh one, and you tell me if it passes the test?" The girl studied her, expecting a crack, a flinch, a rush of apology. None came. Only patience. When Evelyn walked away to place the order, she felt the weight of the man's gaze. Not the entitled stare she sometimes got from customers, but the tired curiosity of someone who'd been searching for something and didn't know what it was. 10 minutes later, she returned with a plate. Grilled cheese cut neatly into 4 squares on multigrain bread, pale gold, edges trimmed. The girl inspected it like evidence. Then, without warning, she swept her arm across the table. The sandwich and glass shattered on the floor, water splashing Evelyn's shoes. The diner froze. The man pressed his palms to his eyes. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. Evelyn knelt quietly, picking up 1 square of bread from the tiles. She didn't look at the father or the mess, only at the trembling child. "You're right," she said after a moment, voice calm as still water. "This side's a little darker than the other. My mistake." The girl blinked, unprepared for agreement. "But I have to ask," Evelyn added, meeting her eyes. "When you threw it, was that a 10 or more like a 7.5? Good distance, but the splash got a little messy." A ripple of surprised laughter passed through the room. The girl's mouth opened, then closed again. Her father lifted his head, disbelief softening into something almost like hope. Evelyn smiled, gentle but unyielding. "If you're going to make a scene, might as well make it epic." For the first time that morning, little Sophie Whitmore looked unsure of her script. Sophie's small hands clenched into fists on her lap, but she didn't move. The silence that followed was so complete that even the kitchen fan seemed to hesitate. Evelyn simply gathered the fragments of the plate, each motion steady, unhurried, as though chaos had never entered the room. "Still hungry?" she asked softly. I said I'm not. "Then you'll just sit a while and keep your dad company," Evelyn said, standing. "His coffee's getting cold." The child's eyes widened at the quiet firmness of the remark. Around them, the diner exhaled plates clattered again. Conversation resumed in murmurs. The tension dissolved like sugar in coffee. Graham Whitmore, still pale from embarrassment, whispered, "Thank you." Evelyn shook her head. "No need. Everyone has their storms." She returned to the counter, feeling the ache in her knees from crouching. Dave, the manager, was hovering near the kitchen door, jaw tight. "You okay, kiddo?" he muttered. "Because I was 2 seconds away from showing that brat the door." Evelyn gave a tired smile. She doesn't need another door closed. Just one that stays open long enough. He blinked, sighed, and disappeared back into the kitchen. When she brought Graham his check, he hesitated. "You handled her like no one ever has." "She's 10, Evelyn said. "That's a hard age, even without the spotlight." "You know who I am?" She nodded. "Hard to miss. Forbes covers make good coaster talk." His expression faltered between pride and shame. "Then you know she's difficult." Evelyn glanced toward Sophie, who sat tracing a fingertip around the rim of her glass. "She's not difficult. She's grieving." He swallowed hard, then said quietly, "Her mother was—" "I know." Evelyn's tone was gentle, final. "I'm sorry for your loss." Something in her calmness made him look away, as if the words carried too much weight to meet head-on. He signed the bill, left a generous tip, too generous, and guided Sophie toward the door. Halfway out, the girl stopped. For the first time, she looked back at Evelyn. There was no smile, no glare, just a long, studying gaze, as if trying to understand why this woman hadn't broken. Evelyn met her eyes and gave a small, uncommitted shrug. A quiet "you'll figure it out someday." The door chimed behind them, leaving only the faint echo of autumn wind and the scent of grilled cheese. Later, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Evelyn wiped down the tables one last time. The diner emptied, the neon flickered to life outside, and a kind of stillness settled, the kind that comes when you've survived another day that could have gone worse. Dave called from the back, "Clock out, kiddo. You've earned it." "Yeah," she said, pulling off her apron. "Feels like something's starting, doesn't it?" She didn't know why she said it. Maybe it was the look in that child's eyes, or the way the man's voice had cracked when he said thank you. But as she stepped out into the cool air and watched a black Mercedes pull away down Marymount Avenue, she had the strangest sense that the sound of that diner doorbell had just changed her life. As the car disappeared into the misty curve of the road, Evelyn didn't see the man glance back in the rearview mirror or the little hand pressing against the window. She only heard the bell jingle once more, long after they were gone. Morning mist still clung to the edges of Asheville when the black Mercedes reappeared outside Willow's diner the next day. The driver stepped out first, polished shoes touching the damp pavement, and held the back door open. Evelyn, mid-shift and halfway through refilling a pot of coffee, froze. Graham Whitmore emerged this time without the exhaustion of the day before, though the sadness still lived behind his eyes. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice quieter than she remembered. "You have a minute?" Dave lifted an eyebrow from the kitchen window, mouthing, "Don't quit on me." Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron and nodded. Outside, the air smelled of rain and wood smoke. Graham gestured toward the car. "I owe you an apology, and maybe an opportunity. My daughter hasn't stopped talking about you. That's rare." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Should I be flattered or afraid?" "Both," he admitted. "I'm offering something unusual. I'd like you to spend some time with Sophie afternoons, weekends. Not as a nanny exactly, as someone she'll actually listen to. Mr. Whitmore, I wait tables and study psychology part-time. I'm not a miracle worker." He handed her a card. $400,000 a year. Full tuition for your degree. I'm not asking for miracles, just patience." For a long second, she stared at the card, feeling the weight of every overdue bill on her kitchen counter. Then she looked up. "That's generous. Maybe too generous." Graham's gaze softened. "It's not charity. It's desperation." By afternoon, She stood at the gates of the Whitmore estate, a stretch of stone and glass carved into the hillside like something out of a magazine. The guard buzzed her in, and a winding driveway led her through trees, painted gold by autumn. She caught a glimpse of the city below, the church steeples, the faint echo of the diner's bell in her memory. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet. It smelled of lemon polish and loneliness. Art lined the walls, portraits of people who seemed to be listening to conversations long over. Evelyn's reflection followed her in the polished floors, a stranger among ghosts. "Miss Hart," came a voice from the staircase. Sophie descended slowly, dressed in her school uniform, chin lifted in practiced defiance. "Dad said you were coming." "Looks like he was right. I didn't think you'd say yes." "Most people don't." Evelyn smiled. "Most people don't throw sandwiches at them first." A small flicker of amusement crossed the girl's face, gone as quickly as it came. "You're not like the others," she said. "Neither are you, is it?" From the second-floor railing, another voice drifted down smooth, honeyed, dangerous. "So this is the famous Waitress." A woman in her early 40s descended the stairs, every step deliberate. She wore a silk blouse, the color of wine, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Margaret Cole," she said, extending a manicured hand. "Sophie's aunt. Graham's sister." Evelyn shook it politely. "Evelyn Hart." "I've heard a lot about you already," Maggie said, the syllables edged like crystal. "Quite the impression you made at the diner. Not everyone would call challenging a 10-year-old impressive, but my brother has unconventional tastes." "Maggie," Graham's voice echoed from the hall. "That's enough." "Oh, relax, dear. We're family here," she purred before gliding away toward the library. Evelyn exhaled. "She's direct." "She's a hurricane," Graham muttered. "Don't take it personally." Hours passed in the stillness of the mansion. Evelyn followed Sophie to the kitchen, where a housekeeper named Maria offered warm cookies and a cautious smile. Sophie refused them, busy rearranging silver napkin rings into geometric patterns. "You like puzzles," Evelyn observed. "They make sense. People don't." "True," Evelyn said, sitting across from her. "But sometimes people are just puzzles with missing pieces." Sophie tilted her head. "And you think you can find them?" "Not all of them. Just enough to make the picture kinder." The girl considered that, nibbling on a cookie she'd pretended not to want. In that moment, Evelyn saw something fragile beneath the armor, an echo of herself at 10, wanting to be seen but terrified of being known. Later, Graham showed Evelyn through the rooms that seemed to hold their breath. The music room with its grand piano draped in a dust sheet. The hallway where Lydia's photographs hung, smiling at a life that had ended too soon. "She was a pianist," Graham said quietly. "Played every morning. I haven't let anyone touch that room since." Evelyn's voice soughed. "Does Sophie know?" "She knows too much," he said, eyes on the covered piano. "And not nearly enough." They paused by the tall windows overlooking the city. Below, Asheville glowed in the early dusk street lamps, flickering. Cars moving like fireflies down the mountain roads. Graham turned to her. "You're probably wondering why I chose you." "I'm not sure yet," she said. "Because you looked at my daughter and didn't see a problem. You saw a person." Evelyn met his gaze. "She's a kid who's hurting. You'd be surprised what a little patience can do." He nodded almost to himself. "Patience. I used to have that. Somewhere between the boardrooms and the headlines, I lost it." A faint melody drifted down the hall. A single piano note. Hesitant. Off-key. Graham froze. Evelyn turned toward the sound. "She hasn't played that thing in 2 years," he whispered. They followed the echo to the closed door of the music room. The note came again, trembling. Evelyn reached for the handle, but Graham stopped her. "Let her be," he murmured. "If she's playing, it's because she feels safe." The door stayed closed. The music faded. And in that silence, something fragile and unspoken passed between them, a shared understanding that this house, heavy with grief, might finally be learning how to breathe again. When Evelyn left that night, the porch lights glowed like small moons along the drive. She looked back once, toward the tall windows of the mansion. A silhouette moved behind the curtain, a child's small shape, watching. Evelyn lifted her hand in a quiet wave, not sure if it was seen. Then she turned toward the city lights, the card in her pocket pressing against her palm like a promise and a warning all at once. As she reached the main road, the first stars appeared over the ridge. Somewhere far off, the bells of Street Marys rang their slow, patient song. And for the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt that life, like those mountains, might still hold room for second chances. The next afternoon, a light drizzle swept across the Blue Ridge Mountains. The Whitmore estate stood under gray skies, its stone walls glistening like they were carved from rain itself. Evelyn parked her old sedan by the servants' entrance. Her car looked comically small beside Graham's line of black vehicles. Maria, the housekeeper, greeted her with a warm smile. "Señorita Evelyn, coffee's fresh. You'll need it. The little one's in one of her moods again." Evelyn laughed softly, slipping off her coat. "Are there days when she's not?" "Once," Maria said. "But we were closed that day." Inside, the house hummed with distant sounds, footsteps echoing, the faint ring of a phone behind closed doors, and somewhere above, the uneven rhythm of piano keys being pressed at random. Evelyn followed the sound up the grand staircase, her hand gliding along the polished wood of the banister. She paused at the top. Down the long hallway, a door stood slightly open. Behind it, the hesitant notes of a melody drifted out, stopping and starting like a broken heartbeat. Evelyn knocked lightly. "Hey, that sounds beautiful." Sophie's voice came back, small but clear. "It's not supposed to sound beautiful. It's supposed to sound like she did messy." Evelyn stepped inside. Dust motes danced in a shaft of light from the window, revealing a room that had not been touched in years. A white sheet covered the grand piano, another draped over a framed photograph on the wall. The air smelled faintly of cedar and memory. Sophie sat on the piano bench, legs dangling. She lifted the sheet halfway, exposing the keys. A thin film of dust marked every note she had dared to touch. Evelyn approached quietly. "Your mom used to play here, didn't she?" Sophie nodded, her fingers resting on middle C. "Every morning before school. She'd play until Dad called from downstairs and said we were late. Then she'd kiss me and run her hands through my hair. I hated it when she did that." "Why?" "Because she'd mess it up. I'd spend 10 minutes fixing it." Evelyn smiled faintly. "And now you'd give anything to feel that again?" The child looked away. "People always say that. They say it because it's true." Evelyn sat on the nearby armchair. "When you lose someone, the things that used to annoy you start to sound like music." Sophie stared at the piano keys for a long moment, then pressed another note. She liked this room because of the echo. She said it made the house sing back to her. Evelyn listened. The faint reverberation hung in the air, a fragile hum that seemed to breathe. "Maybe it still does," she whispered. Downstairs, a door slammed. Maggie's voice cut through the stillness. "Graham, you can't keep throwing money at your guilt." Sophie flinched. Evelyn looked toward the hallway. "That's Aunt Maggie," Sophie muttered. "She says I'm spoiled. She says you're temporary." "Well," Evelyn said calmly, "she's half right. I am temporary. But while I'm here, I'm on your side." Sophie's lips curved in something like a smile. "Then you're brave. Nobody stays on my side for long." Evelyn reached over and lifted the corner of the dust sheet entirely off the piano. "Then let's change that rule." Her fingers brushed a single key. The sound that came out was pure, resonant, startling. The room answered with a trembling echo that filled the walls with warmth. Sophie gasped. "It sang." Evelyn smiled softly. "Maybe it never forgot how." And the sound lingered, trembling in the air like a ghost, unsure if it was welcome. Sophie's eyes stayed fixed on the vibrating strings beneath the lid. "It sounds alive," she whispered. Evelyn smiled gently. "Maybe that's the point." Behind them, a faint rustle broke the quiet. Graham stood in the doorway, his hands still in his pockets, his expression unreadable. He looked older than he had the day before, as if time itself had caught up to him overnight. "I didn't know you could play," he said softly. "I can't," Evelyn answered, rising. "The piano played itself. I just gave it permission." Sophie turned in her seat. "Dad, can I keep it uncovered?" He hesitated, glancing at the white sheet bunched on the floor. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "Why not?" she asked, defiant. "It's just a piano. It's not just anything," he said, the words heavier than he meant them to be. "Your mother loved that room more than—" He stopped himself. "More than she loved the world outside it." Sophie's small face hardened. So we have to pretend it doesn't exist because it hurts you? The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Evelyn stepped closer, her tone careful but firm. Maybe it doesn't have to hurt forever. Maybe it can remind you that she was real. Graham's eyes flickered toward her, searching for something accusation or mercy. He found only calm. The tension in his shoulders softened, if only slightly. Maggie's heels clicked against the marble floor as she appeared behind him, her presence slicing through the moment. "Well, isn't this touching?" she said with a cool smile. "The help resurrecting the past. How quaint." Sophie scowled. "She's not the help." "Sweetheart," Maggie cooed, "you don't understand how the world works. People like her come and go. They make you feel better for a season, and then they leave. That's life." "And?" Graham's jaw tightened. "Maggie, enough." "Oh, I'm sure she means well," Maggie went on, circling the piano like a cat. "But maybe stirring ghosts isn't the kindest therapy for a child, don't you think?" Evelyn met her eyes. "Sometimes ghosts need to be heard before they can rest." Maggie tilted her head, lips curving slightly. "How poetic. You should put that on a resume." Before Graham could reply, Sophie struck another key this time, harder, bolder. The note rang out, shivering through the chandelier and up the staircase. It echoed so deeply that everyone fell still. Then, slowly, another note answered it from the far end of the room, faint, delayed, but unmistakable. Graham turned, confused. "That's impossible." Evelyn placed a hand on the piano lid. "It's the acoustics," she said softly, though even she wasn't certain. "The house remembers her music." For a long minute, no one spoke. The rain outside intensified, tapping against the window panes like fingertips. Maggie frowned, unsettled, and excused herself without another word. When she was gone, Graham moved closer, his voice breaking into a whisper. "She used to play that note whenever she wanted me to come downstairs. It was our signal. I'd answer with another, same as that echo." Sophie looked up at him, eyes wide. "You mean that's her?" He knelt beside her, trembling. "No, honey. It's just the house. It's memory. But even as he said it, the next note trembled through the air. Higher, softer, like laughter fading down a hallway. Evelyn felt the goosebumps rise on her arms. "Memory can sound a lot like love if you listen the right way," she murmured. Graham stayed kneeling beside the piano, his hand hovering just above the keys. "For 2 years I couldn't step into this room," he said quietly. "But now it feels like she's inviting me back." Sophie pressed one more key, the gentlest touch of all. "Then maybe she forgave you." He looked at his daughter, startled. "For what?" "For not listening sooner." Outside, thunder rolled gently across the mountains. Evelyn turned toward the window. The rain had slowed, leaving streaks of silver light on the glass. In the reflection, she saw the three of them, the father, the daughter, and the stranger who had somehow become part of their silence. In that stillness, she thought of something her mother once said. "Houses don't just hold people. They hold the echoes of the ones we loved." When she glanced back, Graham's hand finally came down, pressing the key beside Sophie's. 2 notes sounded, one deep, one light. Together, they formed a fragile chord that filled the room and seemed to steady the air itself. Neither of them spoke. The house listened, and somewhere deep within its walls, the faintest hum rose again, soft as a breath, like the music room had found its voice at last. By late October, the leaves on the Blue Ridge turned from gold to ember, and the air outside the Whitmore estate carried the faint scent of wood smoke. Inside, Evelyn had started to recognize the rhythms of the house, the quiet hum of the staff, the steady tick of the grandfather clock, and Sophie's piano notes drifting faintly down the hall every afternoon like the sound of healing, learning to breathe. Some days, Graham joined them, standing silently at the doorway, arms crossed but eyes soft. Other days, he disappeared into meetings and phone calls, his voice echoing through the marble halls like a man trying to sound busy enough not to feel. That morning, Evelyn found a fresh bouquet of chrysanthemums placed near the piano. The scent was too deliberate, too formal. Sophie frowned when she saw it. "Aunt Maggie," she muttered. Evelyn looked at the card. "For the peace we pretend to have. M.C." Sophie rolled her eyes. She likes to remind Dad that peace is her idea. She seems particular, Evelyn said. She's controlling, Sophie corrected. Dad says she's protective, but I know the difference. Outside, wind brushed through the pines. Evelyn smiled softly. You're observant. Maybe too observant for 10. I'm 11 next month, Sophie said proudly. Then, after a pause, she doesn't like you. I noticed. She said you're dangerous. Evelyn laughed under her breath. I've been called worse. Did she say why? Because Dad listens to you. Evelyn stopped wiping the piano and met Sophie's gaze. The honesty in the girl's voice cut through her like truth always does. Down the hall, a faint clatter echoed porcelain against marble, followed by Maggie's familiar voice, low and irritated. If you tell him, Maria, I swear you'll regret it. Evelyn froze. Sophie's head tilted toward the sound. What's she doing? Stay here, Evelyn whispered. She stepped into the corridor. At the far end, Maggie stood near the study door, her phone pressed to her ear. Her tone was smooth, but her body was taut. I told you, it's not about the money, it's about control. As long as I manage the estate, he's predictable. She paused, listening. Yes, I know about the girl. A waitress doesn't last long. She'll make a mistake soon enough. The call ended. Maggie turned and her gaze locked with Evelyn's. For a brief, breathless moment, neither woman spoke. Eavesdropping, Maggie said coolly, slipping the phone into her pocket. That's not in your job description. Evelyn forced a calm smile. Neither is scheming, but here we are. Maggie's lips curved in a smile that wasn't really a smile. You're clever. That's unfortunate. Graham has always had a weakness for clever women. I think he has a weakness for truth. Truth, Maggie repeated softly. How quaint. You think this house runs on truth? Before Evelyn could respond, Graham's voice carried down the hall. Evelyn? Maggie's expression smoothed instantly, like a curtain falling. She turned with practiced grace, the perfect sister again. In here, dear brother. Graham appeared, sleeves rolled up, holding a folder. Good timing. I wanted to show you something. Maggie smiled sweetly. If it's about the trust accounts, we'll talk later. Not that, he said. Evelyn's program for Sophie. She's been making real progress. Oh yes, Maggie murmured, her eyes never leaving Evelyn. Progress can be such a dangerous thing in the wrong hands. She left, perfume trailing like smoke. Evelyn pretended to exhale casually, but her pulse thudded. Graham glanced at her. You okay? Fine, she lied. Just allergies. The flowers. He gave a small, knowing smile. She's complicated. That's one word for it. They both turned toward the sound of piano keys echoing from the music room. Sophie was playing the same tune again, the hesitant melody that refused to die. Graham listened for a moment. She reminds me of Lydia, he said. When she played, the whole house stopped breathing. Evelyn nodded. Maybe it's learning to breathe again. He looked at her, thoughtful. You always have a way of saying the right thing. It's not magic, she said. Just listening. End to one. Outside, thunder grumbled distantly, the sky folding into deeper shades of gray. Evelyn glanced at the window, uneasy. The air inside the mansion felt heavy, charged with something she couldn't yet name, a whisper beneath the quiet, a secret waiting behind every closed door. That evening, the rain came without warning, soft at first, then heavy, the kind that turns the mountain fog into sheets of moving silver. Evelyn stood by the library window, watching the drops slide down the glass like restless thoughts. The house had gone quiet after dinner. Sophie had gone upstairs early, tired from her lessons, while Graham lingered by the fire with a drink in hand. Evelyn brought him another blanket, setting it gently over the arm of the chair. You'll catch a cold if you fall asleep there, she said. He smiled faintly. I don't sleep much these days. The piano? The memories. He stared into the flames. I used to think grief was a storm you just had to wait out. But it's more like fog. It never leaves. It just changes where it settles. Evelyn took a seat across from him. Maybe that's why the house feels so heavy sometimes. It's full of fog that doesn't know where to go. He chuckled quietly. You talk like Lydia used to. She always said this house had moods. She sounded wise. She was chaos with grace. Drove me insane. and saved me at the same time. And a log cracked in the fireplace. The orange light danced across his face, softening the years etched into it. The day she died, he said slowly, we fought about something ridiculous, whether to sell the mountain cabin. I left for a meeting. She took Sophie to school, and on the way back, he stopped, his throat tightening. You don't have to, Evelyn began. No, I do. His voice trembled but held steady. It wasn't a storm or another driver. It was a deer. She swerved, went off the road near Craggy Gardens. They said it was quick. He swallowed, the silence between them vast and human. I told myself I'd never forgive the world for taking her, he said. But now, I'm not sure if I ever forgave myself for leaving angry. Evelyn's voice was low, steady. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It just lets you carry it without it crushing you. He looked up, meeting her eyes. You really believe that? I have to. Otherwise, none of this. She gestured to the rain. The house, the faint piano upstairs, would mean anything. For a long while, neither spoke. The rain softened. Upstairs, faint footsteps padded across the hall. Sophie's voice broke the quiet. Dad? He turned toward the staircase. Up here, sweetheart. She appeared at the top landing, clutching a small picture frame. I heard you, she said softly. You were talking about Mom. Oh. Graham's face changed fear, then guilt, then something like surrender. You should be asleep. I can't sleep when you sound sad, she said, walking down the stairs one careful step at a time. Can I sit with you? He nodded. She climbed onto the couch beside him, curling up under his arm like she had when she was little. Evelyn quietly rose to leave, giving them space, but Sophie called after her. Stay. Evelyn hesitated. Graham gave a small nod. Sophie looked at the fire. I remember that day. Mom told me to wait in the car while she got coffee. I said I hated her hair. She laughed. Her voice cracked. Then she didn't come back. Graham wrapped his arm tighter around her. She knew you didn't mean it, sweetheart. But what if she didn't? She did, Evelyn said softly. Mothers always know when it's love hiding under the noise. Sophie wiped her eyes on her sleeve. Aunt Maggie says talking about her keeps us stuck. Graham sighed. Maggie thinks silence is safety. Then I hate silence, Sophie said. Evelyn smiled gently. So does the piano. For the first time, Graham laughed a quiet, raw laugh that felt like sunlight breaking through cloud. You two might just fix this house after all, he said. Outside, thunder rolled far away, fading toward the mountains. Later that night, when the house finally slept, the corridors filled with the slow ticking of the grandfather clock. Evelyn walked toward her room, the sound comforting. But as she passed the study, a faint metallic click made her stop. The door was open just enough to show a sliver of light. Inside, Maggie stood by the wall safe, her back turned. Her hands moved quickly, confident, spinning the dial. She reached inside, pulled out a velvet case, and smiled slowly, like a secret had just changed hands. Evelyn froze in the hallway, hidden by the shadows. She wanted to speak, to ask what Maggie was doing, but the words caught in her throat. Maggie whispered to herself, almost lovingly, one more move, and it's over. She closed the safe, switched off the light, and disappeared down the hall. When she was gone, the silence of the house pressed close again, heavy and knowing. Evelyn stood alone, listening to the faint echo of her footsteps fade. Somewhere above, the piano hummed a single low note, quiet, accidental, as if the house itself had sighed in warning. The morning after the storm, the air was sharp and clean, the kind of cold that made breath visible and honest. Frost rimed the window panes of the Whitmore estate, and the sun hung low behind the mountains like a shy guest. Evelyn woke early, unable to shake the image of Maggie's silhouette by the open safe. She made coffee in the quiet kitchen, the old kettle whistling like a memory. Maria was already there, her rosary glinting as she scrubbed the counter. Rough night? She asked gently. You could say that, Evelyn said, handing her a cup. Maria crossed herself. The señorita is playing dangerous games. I heard her walking near the study very late. Evelyn hesitated. Do you know what's in that safe? Maria lowered her voice. Documents, jewelry, and something he never wears anymore. A blue diamond necklace that belonged to Mrs. Whitmore. They call it the Blue Sonata. Graham gave it to her the night Sophie was born. Evelyn felt a chill unrelated to the morning air. Does Sophie know? She's seen pictures. It was her mother's favorite. Every year on Sophie's birthday she'd wear it, say it sang with a light. Evelyn took a slow sip of coffee. Maybe that's why Maggie wanted it. Maria frowned. You think she'd steal from her own brother? Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't want to believe it either. By mid-morning, Sophie was in the music room, her hair tied back with a blue ribbon, practicing the same melody again and again. The notes wavered gentle, searching. Evelyn joined her, sitting quietly nearby. Your dad says you're playing beautifully, Evelyn said. He says that because he doesn't listen to the mistakes, Sophie murmured, not looking up. He just hears what he wants to. Evelyn smiled softly. That's most of us, I think. Sophie pressed another key. I dreamed about Mom last night. She was walking through the snow, wearing the necklace. It was shining so bright I couldn't see her face. That sounds like something she'd do, Evelyn said, turn grief into light. The girl nodded. I think she wants to tell me something. Evelyn hesitated, touched by the earnestness in her voice. What do you think it is? Sophie shrugged. That maybe not everyone who smiles means it. Evelyn's breath caught. The child's words were sharper than she realized. Later, Graham joined them, carrying a small box wrapped in velvet. Thought you might like to see this, he said, placing it on the piano. Sophie opened it and gasped. Inside lay an old photograph Lydia sitting at the piano, a younger Graham beside her, and baby Sophie in her arms. The blue sonata gleamed around Lydia's neck. Dad, Sophie whispered, why do you keep this locked away? He smiled faintly. Because every time I look at it, I start remembering what I lost instead of what I had. Evelyn studied him quietly. Maybe that's what remembering is for, so we can learn to see it differently. He nodded, eyes glistening. You sound like her, you know. Before Evelyn could reply, Maggie entered the room. Her presence, as always, carried its own chill. What a lovely little gathering, she said smoothly. Family album day? Sophie straightened, clutching the photo. We were just talking about Mom. How sweet, Maggie said, her gaze flicking briefly to the velvet box. You should be careful with old things, dear. They tend to stir up dust. Evelyn met her eyes. Some dust needs stirring. Maggie's smile tightened. I see you're becoming quite the philosopher. Tell me, Miss Hart, do philosophers usually overstep the help's quarters? Before Evelyn could speak, Graham cut in. Enough, Maggie. We're not doing this. Oh, brother, she sighed. You've always been sentimental. You bring a stranger into this house and suddenly she's family. Maggie, I'm not finished, she snapped, voice sharp as glass. This woman doesn't belong here. Lydia's gone, and no one can replace her. The words hung heavy. Sophie's eyes filled instantly, the photograph trembling in her small hands. Evelyn's heart twisted. I'm not here to replace anyone, she said softly, just to help what's left find its way back together. For a heartbeat, the house seemed to stop breathing. Then Sophie stood abruptly and ran upstairs. The photograph clutched to her chest. Graham turned away, his voice low. You should go, Maggie. She laughed lightly. Of course, but don't say I didn't warn you. When she left, the room felt colder. Graham rubbed his temples. She's not wrong, you know. I bring people in because I don't know how to be alone with what's left. Evelyn looked at him gently. Maybe what's left is all you ever needed. He lifted his eyes to hers, and for a fleeting second, something unspoken passed between them, understanding, maybe even trust. Outside, wind moved through the trees, carrying the smell of rain and pine. Evelyn rose. I'll go check on Sophie. As she reached the top of the staircase, she saw the girl sitting on the floor outside her bedroom, the photograph beside her, and the small key, the one she'd once hidden under her pillow, clutched in her palm. Miss Evelyn, Sophie said softly, I think I'm ready to open Mom's box. Evelyn followed Sophie into her mother's old room. The air smelled faintly of cedar and lavender, the kind of scent that lingers when someone leaves too soon. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, painting soft patterns on the wooden floor. On the vanity sat a small wooden box, its surface carved with ivy leaves. Sophie knelt beside it, sliding the tiny key into the lock with trembling fingers. The latch gave a quiet click, like a breath released after years of holding in. Inside were simple things: a folded silk scarf, an old concert program, a letter sealed with blue wax, and a photograph that had been torn in half. Sophie's brow furrowed. Why would Mom keep a picture like this? Evelyn took the torn photo carefully. One half showed Lydia, smiling beside the piano. The other half, missing, had been ripped away cleanly. Maybe it was too painful to see the whole thing, she murmured. Or maybe someone else took the other half, Sophie said, her eyes sharp. Evelyn looked at her, surprised by the clarity in her tone. You think someone did this on purpose? She said not everyone who smiles means it, Sophie whispered, echoing her dream. Maybe this is what she meant. Before Evelyn could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from downstairs, measured, deliberate. She recognized the clicking of Maggie's heels. Stay here, Evelyn said. She slipped quietly down the staircase. The study door stood ajar again, light spilling from within. Maggie's voice carried softly. Yes, the diamond. It will fetch more than enough. I just need him to trust me one more time. A pause, then lower, colder. By the time he realizes, it'll already be done. Evelyn's heart thudded. She peeked in. Maggie was holding the blue velvet case Maria had described, its contents glimmering faintly under the lamp. Then Sophie's voice, small but piercing, came from behind. Aunt Maggie? Maggie froze. Evelyn turned. Horrified, Sophie stood in the doorway, clutching the torn photo. What are you doing with Mom's necklace? Maggie blinked, mask slipping for only a second. Sweetheart, this isn't what it looks like. It looks like stealing, Sophie said. Watch your tone, Maggie snapped. Then, realizing her mistake, softened her voice. I'm keeping it safe. Your father doesn't need to see this. It only hurts him. Evelyn stepped forward. You mean it hurts your plans? Maggie's eyes flashed. You have no idea what you're meddling in. Oh, I have enough, Evelyn said quietly. I saw you last night. For the first time, Maggie's composure cracked. You think you can come into this house, play the savior, and undo everything I've built? You're just a waitress who doesn't know when to stay silent. Sophie flinched at the venom in her voice. My mom trusted people like her, she said firmly. And she was right. Maggie turned on her, furious. Your mother was a fool! The words struck the room like thunder. The silence that followed was absolute until another voice cut through it. Say that again, Graham said from the doorway. He stood there, pale, still, but his voice was low steel. Maggie's face drained of color. Graham, he raised a hand. Not another word, put it down. Reluctantly, she set the velvet case on the desk. The blue sonata caught the lamplight, scattering it across the dark walls like fragments of something pure. After Lydia died, Graham said, stepping forward, I told myself you were protecting us. I didn't see that you were protecting yourself. Maggie's eyes glistened. I did everything for you. This family. This house. You did it for control, he said softly. And you used our grief to get it. She opened her mouth to argue, but no sound came. He turned to Evelyn. How long have you known? Since last night, Evelyn said. I didn't want to believe it. Embry. He nodded, eyes dark with sorrow, then turned to Sophie. You shouldn't have had to see this. I'm glad I did, she whispered. Mom would have wanted the truth. Maggie's shoulders sagged. For a fleeting moment, she looked less like a villain and more like someone who had lost herself chasing the wrong kind of love. You'll regret this, she said quietly, and walked past them into the rain. Graham closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. Sophie ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. He bent to hold her, his voice breaking. I'm sorry, sweetheart. For all of it. It's okay, Dad, she said. We can fix it. Miss Evelyn says everything broken can be mended if you look at it long enough. He looked up at Evelyn, tears mixing with gratitude. Did she know? Evelyn smiled faintly. Sometimes you just need the right light. Outside, dawn began to break through the clouds, pale and soft. Inside the study, the blue sonata lay on the desk, catching the first rays of morning, no longer a symbol of loss, but of truth finally seen. 2 days after Maggie's departure, the Whitmore estate felt strangely peaceful, like a house that had been holding its breath and had finally exhaled. The staff moved quietly, but with lighter steps. and the scent of freshly baked bread drifted from the kitchen instead of tension. Evelyn stood by the window in the music room, her fingers tracing the smooth wood of the piano lid. It had been dusted and polished, ready for something new. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, glinting off the crystal vase beside the keys. Inside it, the blue sonata rested gently on a ribbon, no longer locked away. Sophie entered, barefoot, her hair loose and eyes still swollen from the emotional days before. "Dad says Aunt Maggie's gone back to Atlanta," she murmured. Evelyn nodded. "Sometimes distance is the only way people learn to see clearly. She's not coming back, is she? Maybe someday," Evelyn said softly. "But not the same way." Sophie looked down at the piano bench. "Can we play something?" "Not sad, though," Evelyn smiled. "Not sad. Maybe something that sounds like breathing again." They sat together, the bench creaking softly beneath them. Sophie placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes were hesitant, then stronger, an old melody that Lydia used to play. Evelyn joined in, her touch light and careful. The music filled the room, gentle as morning rain, fragile but alive. Graham stood in the doorway, watching. His tie hung loose, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He didn't interrupt. He simply listened, eyes glistening as the house seemed to wake up around them. When the song ended, Sophie turned to him shyly. "Was that okay?" He walked over and kissed the top of her head. It was perfect. They shared breakfast together in the kitchen, a rare thing. Toast, jam, and laughter in the same room. Maria poured coffee with a grin, muttering something about miracles under her breath. Afterward, Graham pulled Evelyn aside. "I owe you more than I can say," he told her. "You don't owe me," she said. "You just listened when it mattered." He shook his head. "You saw what I refused to see. You saved us." I didn't save anyone," Evelyn replied gently. "You did that when you decided to believe your daughter." Graham looked down, the weight of both guilt and gratitude softening his features. "You're staying, right?" Evelyn hesitated. "For a while. But this," she gestured to the piano room, the laughter echoing faintly from the hall, "this is what you and Sophie have to keep building yourselves." I studied her quietly. "You always know when to step back, don't you? It's easier when you've been the one who stayed too long before." Her words lingered in the air like dust motes caught in light. Graham nodded slowly, understanding without needing to ask. That evening, as twilight painted the mountains in rose and violet, Evelyn took a walk through the estate garden. The last of the chrysanthemums were fading, their petals curled inward like secrets being kept. She could still hear the faint sound of Sophie's laughter from an open window. For the first time, Evelyn let herself smile deeply, freely. Maybe this was what redemption truly looked like. Not grand gestures, not miracles, but quiet mornings where the sound of a piano meant the past was finally learning to rest. But peace, she knew, was never the end of a story, only the pause before the next truth arrived. That night, the house glowed with a different kind of light. Graham had set up candles along the music room windowsill, their flames flickering softly against the glass. Sophie stood by the piano, hands folded nervously. "This was Mom's song," she said, glancing at her father. "But I changed the ending." He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then play it your way." She began quietly, the melody trembling at first, then growing fuller, braver. Each note carried both memory and forgiveness. When she reached the final chord, she added 3 new notes, light, hopeful, her own. Silence followed, the kind that doesn't ask for applause. Graham reached for her hand. "You sound like her," he said softly. Sophie smiled through tears. "No, Dad, I sound like us." Evelyn stood in the doorway, eyes glistening. Graham turned to her, holding out a folded piece of paper. "We found this in Lydia's box. It's a letter. To you." Evelyn blinked, startled. "To me?" He nodded. "She met you once at the diner. Said your kindness stayed with her." The letter was short, written in Lydia's looping hand. "If grief ever finds this house, may someone kind remind them that love never leaves, it only changes shape." Evelyn folded it back carefully. "She already knew," she whispered. Sophie hugged her tightly. "You're not leaving, are you?" Evelyn smiled. "Not tonight." Outside, wind rustled the bare branches. Inside, the music lingered a promise between hearts that had finally found their way back to one another. The first snow came quietly that Sunday morning. It drifted across the mountains like a secret, softening every sound. The Whitmore estate, once a house of echoes, now hummed gently with life, piano notes, laughter, and the clinking of breakfast dishes. Evelyn stood by the kitchen window, watching Sophie chase snowflakes in the garden. The girl's red coat made her look like a spark, moving through white silence. Behind her, Graham poured coffee. His movements slower these days, more thoughtful. "She hasn't stopped smiling since the concert," he said. "That's what healing looks like," Evelyn replied, her voice tender. "It starts quiet." He looked at her, studying the calm in her eyes. "You've done more for us than anyone ever could." Lydia's letter, she must have known somehow. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Sometimes people see further than we give them credit for." He nodded, then reached into his jacket pocket. "There's something else I wanted you to see." He handed her a small envelope, yellowed with age. "I found it in the safe after Maggie left. It was sealed under the documents addressed to Lydia, but unsigned." Evelyn opened it carefully. Inside was a single line, written in a shaky hand. "I forgive you, even if I never said it out loud." She looked up. "Who wrote this?" "I don't know," Graham said. "But I think she kept it because she believed it was from me." Evelyn's eyes softened. "Maybe that's why she never stopped loving you." For a long moment, they both watched the snow fall, silent and slow. Then Sophie burst through the door, her cheeks flushed pink. "Miss Evelyn, you have to see this!" She dragged Evelyn outside by the hand. The garden was blanketed in snow, untouched except for 2 sets of footprints, hers and her father's. At the center, Sophie had written in the snow with a stick, "Thank you, Mom." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Sophie looked up. "Do you think she can see it?" "Yes," Evelyn said softly. "And she's proud." The girl grinned. "Dad says we should light the fireplace early tonight. He's going to play with me again." "You better not let him play too loud," Evelyn teased. "He might scare the snow away." They laughed together, and for a fleeting second, the world felt perfectly right. But later that evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge and the snow turned silver in the moonlight, Evelyn sat alone in her room, reading Lydia's letter again. "Love never leaves, it only changes shape." She traced the words with her thumb. They felt heavier now, like a gentle push towards something she wasn't ready to face. The truth was simple. She had come here to help heal someone else's family, but somewhere along the way, they had unknowingly healed her too. A quiet knock sounded on her door. Graham stepped in, holding 2 cups of tea. "You planning on running off without saying goodbye?" Evelyn smiled, but her eyes glistened. "You always did see too much." He handed her a cup. "Stay for Christmas. After that, we'll talk about goodbye." She hesitated, then nodded. "Christmas," she agreed. Downstairs, the piano began again, Sophie's laughter spilling through the halls like light, finding its way into every forgotten corner. Christmas Eve arrived with soft carols on the radio and the scent of pine filling every hallway. The Whitmores' living room glowed under the lights of a modest tree, decorated mostly by Sophie's handmade ornaments, crooked stars, paper angels, and one tiny note that read, "Love never leaves." Evelyn sat by the fire, wrapping her scarf tighter. Graham was tuning the piano, and Sophie placed a small candle beside the blue sonata resting on the mantel. "For Mom," she said quietly. They played together that night, father and daughter, laughter echoing through the old house as snow fell steadily outside. Evelyn watched from her chair, her heart both full and heavy. When the song ended, Graham turned to her. "You said once that peace isn't the end of a story," he murmured. "What is it then?" Evelyn smiled. "It's the part where we finally start living again." He reached out, gently taking her hand. "Then stay a while longer." She hesitated, then nodded, her eyes glimmering in the firelight. "Maybe just until the snow melts," Sophie giggled. "That could take forever." Evelyn laughed softly. "Then we'll have time." Outside, the wind quieted, and the lights from the house shimmered against the snow like music turned into light, and love finding its way home once more. By late February, the snow had begun to pull away from the mountains, leaving small rivers glistening through the hills. The Whitmore estate no longer felt like a museum of grief. It had become a home again. Laughter moved easily through the halls, and the piano had found its voice back in the heart of the house. Evelyn walked down the gravel path that led to the garden, her boots crunching softly. The air was cool, filled with the scent of thawing pine. She carried a small box in her hands, a gift she had been meaning to leave before she went. Through the kitchen window, she could see Graham and Sophie baking together. He had flour on his sleeves. She had chocolate on her chin. It was the kind of scene that healed you just by watching. "Miss Evelyn!" Sophie called, spotting her through the window. "We made muffins, real ones this time." Evelyn smiled and waved. "Save one for me, or two if you're feeling generous. M." A few minutes later, she sat at the porch with a steaming cup of tea. Graham joined her, the sound of melting snow dripping from the roof. "Spring's early this year," he said. "It usually is when hearts are lighter," she replied. He chuckled. "You always have the right words." "Maybe," she said softly, "because I've spent too many years looking for them." He turned to her. "You're still leaving?" "It wasn't a question." She nodded slowly. "It's time. You and Sophie have everything you need now. I was just the quiet part in the middle. She'll miss you. I'll miss her too. But sometimes, we have to let the next chapter belong to someone else." Graham was silent for a moment, then handed her a small envelope. "Sophie wanted you to have this." Inside was a drawing 3 figures standing by a piano, smiling, and above them in a child's careful handwriting. "Family means fixing things together." Evelyn blinked back tears. "She's wiser than both of us." "That's her mother in her," he said. They sat quietly for a long time, the sun slipping low over the Blue Ridge Mountains. Evelyn opened her small box and placed it on the porch rail. Inside lay Lydia's letter and a tiny silver charm in the shape of a treble clef. "What's that?" Graham asked. "My reminder," she said, "that sometimes even broken notes can make a song." He nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting. "You'll always have a place here, Evelyn. I know," she said gently. "And that's enough." Inside the house, Sophie began to play again, a melody that carried through the open door, light and hopeful. Evelyn listened, eyes closing, letting the sound settle deep inside her chest. The music had changed. It wasn't Lydia's song anymore. It was Sophie's, brighter, freer, and full of sunlight. A week later, the snow had thinned to pale ribbons across the fields. Evelyn packed slowly that morning, folding each shirt as if sealing a season of her life between the fabric. The little cottage she'd been renting was quiet except for the sound of the kettle whistling, soft, steady, familiar. On the kitchen counter sat a letter, left by Maria the housekeeper when she came to say goodbye. Inside was a pressed white rose and a short note. "You were sent to us when the house needed light." Evelyn smiled faintly. She slipped the rose between the pages of Lydia's old letter and tucked both into her bag. The drive back toward town was slow, the road winding through the misty Blue Ridge. Every turn brought back a memory, the sound of Sophie's laughter echoing down the marble hall, Graham's hesitant voice as he spoke about forgiveness, the faint hum of the piano carrying through the night. Each memory felt like a note in a song that had finally found its ending. When she reached Asheville, the streets were alive with early spring. Shop windows glowed with soft light. People walked with their coats unbuttoned, and the scent of fresh coffee drifted through the air. She parked near the small cafe where it had all begun, the place where she had first poured coffee for strangers and dreamed of doing something that mattered. Inside, the owner, Mrs. Callahan, looked up in surprise. "Well, if it isn't our miracle girl," she said with a grin. "You planning to stay a while?" Evelyn laughed softly. "Maybe just until the snow's completely gone." She took her old seat by the window, the one near the tiny radio that always played soft jazz. The sunlight spilled across the counter, turning her coffee into amber. As she stirred the cup, she noticed a small parcel at her table wrapped in brown paper and tied with blue ribbon. No name, just the familiar handwriting on a small tag. "Open when the music stops." She untied it carefully. Inside was a framed photograph of her, Graham, and Sophie seated at the piano, the one Sophie had drawn in crayons turned now into a real picture. Behind it, folded neatly, was a note. "Miss Evelyn, you once said broken notes can still make a song. We thought you should know the song keeps playing. Dad laughs more now. I don't wake up scared anymore. And when I play, I think of you sitting right next to us, humming the right notes when we forget them. Please come back when the garden blooms. Love always, Sophie." Beneath Sophie's scrawled name, Graham had added a line in his careful handwriting. "Thank you for reminding us how to listen." Evelyn set the letter down and leaned back in her chair. Outside, sunlight melted the last patches of snow along the curb. The air was crisp, filled with the smell of rain and the faint sound of church bells somewhere uphill. For a moment, she simply closed her eyes and breathed, not with sadness, not even nostalgia, just quiet gratitude. She looked out at the street, where children were splashing in puddles and shopkeepers swept away winter's dust. Life was moving forward again, and she would too. Evelyn took a final sip of her coffee, then stood, wrapping her scarf around her neck. As she opened the cafe door, the tiny brass bell above it chimed the same clear note. It always had a sound that somehow meant begin again. She paused on the sidewalk, looking toward the blue outline of the mountains in the distance. "Good job, kid," she whispered with a smile. "Keep playing." And as she walked away, the wind carried faintly through town the sound of piano music drifting from somewhere high up in the hills, bright, alive, and full of the kind of peace that only comes after forgiveness. There's a quiet kind of beauty that comes after winter, the way the earth exhales when the snow begins to melt, the way sunlight glints off puddles like memories returning home. In the Whitmore house, the sound of a piano now drifts through open windows again, no longer haunted, but alive with laughter and forgiveness. Evelyn's journey wasn't about saving anyone. It was about reminding them how to listen, how to see, and how to love again after loss. Sometimes, healing doesn't arrive with fireworks or grand gestures. It comes with a cup of coffee shared in silence, or a child's voice asking to play one more song. It comes in the courage to forgive what once broke you. And for people like Evelyn, and perhaps for all of us, it begins when we realize that redemption is not about forgetting the past, but about carrying its lessons gently forward. The heart of this story lies in three simple truths. That love, when freely given, can rebuild what pain once destroyed. That every act of kindness, no matter how small, can change the course of a life. And that family isn't only made of blood, but of the people who choose to stay when the world grows quiet. Maybe you've felt that kind of silence before. Maybe you've sat at your own kitchen table, hands around a warm mug, thinking about the ones you've lost and the things you wish you'd said. If so, perhaps you already understand Evelyn's lesson that even broken hearts can still beat in harmony when they choose compassion over pride. Like the porch light left on for someone returning home, kindness has a way of finding its path through the dark. A gentle word, a patient ear, a shared smile across generations. These are the small, steady miracles that make life worth living. In a world that often feels hurried and divided, love remains the one language that never fades. And maybe tonight, as you listen to the faint hum of your own memories, the ticking clock, the laughter from the next room, the soft rustle of an old letter, you'll remember that happiness doesn't come from having more, but from giving more of yourself to the people who matter. So friends, as this story closes and the music fades, take a moment to breathe in its warmth. Ask yourself, have you ever been someone's Evelyn? Or perhaps, has someone once been yours? If this story touched your heart, press 1" the comments. If you think it could have said something better, or spoke differently to your soul, press 0 and tell us why. Either way, thank you for sharing a few quiet moments with us tonight. Because in the end, like a lamp glowing softly in a window on a snowy night, a single act of love is enough to light the way home.